God describes himself as merciful and slow to anger. And the reason he's merciful and slow to anger is he understands the baggage that we're struggling under. And he knows what's in our playbook and what's in our heart. And that allows him to be patient and merciful and gracious.
Welcome back, everyone, to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. I'm so delighted to have you along as we finish up my conversation with Keyna Martinez. We've been discussing the playbook, how impactful that playbook is for our interaction and understanding of people. In this episode, we're going to expand that use to relationships nearer to us than what we first imagined. Now, Keyna, some of the examples we've used, I think it's very easy for us to say, okay, yes, that is a very different culture, or that person is very, different than my world. But this can play out underneath the same roof, can it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It can play out in our generational differences. Within our own churches. Speak to the surprising places we might find this to be relevant.
So really everywhere where you have two people interacting, you can have the playbook either aiding or distracting or confusing. So marriages is one that's an easier place to maybe start this next part of the conversation. Different families are their own subculture. They have their own ways of doing things, their own methods, their own expectations. Is dinner on the table precisely at 5:30 when Dad gets home, and it's always going to be a meat and a vegetable, and there's going to be dessert? Or is dinner, come and go as the kids get done from different activities and everybody kind of feeds themselves, except maybe on Sunday or Saturday or some odd night of the week? And we grow up with these different things, and we assume that that's how everybody is. Now, we might experience slight variations if we go visit a friend's house or stay over with relatives or something like that. But we may think that those are just sort of one-off or the occasional variation that we experience maybe in our own family. Now, when you bring those two people together in a marriage, there are all kinds of assumptions that they bring in about what family life is supposed to be, and they are going to have to work through those assumptions. And some will be easy to identify, and some will be very hard, because what may happen is that someone simply feels discouraged or frustrated or upset, and they may not necessarily be able to say why in that moment until they go back and look at, okay, what am I feeling? What are my past experiences? And how does that apply to my life or this situation? So I'll give you an example here. Early in my marriage, I had read a book where the author made a comment. He said, the first 5 years of your marriage, and he was speaking to men, he said, the first 5 years of your marriage, your wife will be responding to you based on how other men in her life have treated her. Her father, her brothers, prior maybe romantic relationships, or just male friends that she has had. So when she hears or sees you as a man, other men in her life and her experiences with them are going to basically, we would say, be informing her playbook on how to react to you. And he said, after 5 years, how she responds is based on you. And you alone, because over that time, the playbook will rewrite. It will adjust based on the interactions with that one individual. And so his caution to men was the first several years, she may not really be responding to you. It may be to someone else. And I've had that myself where my husband makes a comment and I am just angry or hurt or just really strongly emotionally reacting. And when I stop and I make myself think, okay, where is this coming from? I realize, it wasn't him. It wasn't what he said. The tone of his voice made me think of this other experience that had some strong emotional content in the past. And my brain just lumped them all together and said they're the same thing. And it started to respond based on not this moment, but on that moment from 10 years ago that my husband had nothing to do with. And so these things happen all the time in our marriages. They happen in our interactions at work, bosses, subordinates, coworkers. They can happen with our friends. Really, any time we are interacting with another person, we're going to find that we are sometimes being triggered in our playbook, or basically our playbook is choosing a response based on a prior experience that may or may not actually be relevant in this particular situation.
And I think that's so helpful to bear in mind, right? As we live in community with one another, right? So we can expect this to be at play whenever we're engaging with somebody. And it sounds to me the hard work involved is going to really be to linger with a person long enough to learn experiences and learn story. Some of this cannot be remedied with brevity, but does require some lingering with people, right?
It really does. And I have an advantage. In the doctor's exam room, patients come in with a certain level of belief that, what they tell me is going to be confidential, and that doctors are still mostly trustworthy. It's not everybody who has that perspective, but in general, they come in with those assumptions. And so I find that I can get very deep and very personal with my patients because in that setting, it's expected and it's part of normal interactions. It's actually really hard for me to connect emotionally with a lot of people, for instance, just at church or in social interactions. Some of it is I'm more naturally introverted, and I'm always like, am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I prying? Because I'm kind of a private person myself, and so I don't want to ever pry into somebody else's life. And then I can make the mistake, running off of my playbook and what's comfortable to me, of giving people the impression that I'm indifferent to how they feel, or that I don't care because I don't ask. And I don't ask because I don't want to pry, because that's what my playbook says is the respectful thing to do when you see somebody struggling. And other people say, well, if you see someone hurting, of course you should go and comfort them and ask them what's wrong. And so if you're in a relationship with those different expectations in your playbook, one person may be extremely hurt, and then we'll make assumptions about your character. You're cold and unfeeling, which maybe aren't really fair. And so you do have to take time, and it does take building trust. Another reason, though, it's helpful to focus on experiences is experiences are a little bit easier for people to relate. So it gives them a little control over how deep they share. So I can share the facts of this happened to me, and that's not quite so revealing or like opening of my heart or vulnerable than saying, this is how I feel, or I was hurt or wounded by this, which is a much more vulnerable position to be in. But you do have to stay and listen, and it can be really hard. So as an example, recently I had a patient who was in the hospital and did not have a very good experience. And this was a hospital that I'm affiliated with, that I have had patients go to for over a decade, that I feel very confident in the care that they provide. But this patient did not have a good experience. And the visit that they came to see me after their hospital stay, and everything's better, they're healed up, things are continuing to move along. Most of the visit was spent with me listening to her husband and her daughter talk about how their bad experience was and what they felt and how they perceived it. And it is hard sometimes to hear those things. In this case, I'm hearing it about an institution that I respect, which I know is not perfect, but I know a lot of good work happens there. It's even harder when somebody is saying those things about ourselves personally or a group that we feel strongly emotionally attached to. But there is something incredibly powerful in letting people say what their experience was and be heard. So in this particular situation, my patient, her husband, her daughter, they didn't need me to do anything but hear them out and say, I'm sorry that was your experience. That's not what I want for my patients to have. They didn't need anything else. They didn't need me to solve anything. They didn't need me to get on the phone and, get somebody fired. They didn't want revenge. They just wanted somebody to acknowledge the way they were treated and how it made the situation that was already scary and difficult even more frustrating and difficult for them. To just say, you know what? Your instinctive response in this situation is not crazy. Basically, your playbook's not off on this. It was understandable that you felt the way you felt. And many times when people are upset, that's really all they need, is they need to be heard, and they need to be validated. Now, validated doesn't mean I agree with you. Validated doesn't mean I think your perspective is correct. Validated is just saying, if that's what you experienced, I understand now the emotion that comes out of that. It is simply an acknowledgement that what they feel or felt was real to them based on what they went through.
Keyna, a word that we've said a lot over this podcast, and the clinicians have brought it up, is empathy. And what I hear you say is this is a real tool that we can use to become more empathetic and see really the value that empathy brings in terms of understanding another person's playbook, realizing I have a playbook, so that I might walk with people, close relationships, church relationships, work relationships, and neighborhood relationships, cultural relationships, in an understanding way that will allow me to be more winsome in this world, right? And I know that's your heart. And I would like you to, Keyna, you introed by talking about the clients you serve, a wide variety. As you have done the deep work that this has required in your own life and in your own practice, how has it formed how you view and see people? Is that a fair question?
It is a fair question. I think it's a good question. So I'm gonna respond with a story first. So there was a time early in my training where I had cut out a quote. It was actually out of a Gateway Woods newsletter. And the quote was from an author, and he said something to the effect of, it is a good thing in life to be a force of nature, not a sniveling clod of ailments complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. And at the time I first read that, that is exactly how not all, but some of my patients felt to me. Nothing was good enough. I would make suggestions. They wouldn't follow through. They just came in and complained about everything, but didn't seem to take any initiative themselves. And so I kind of, at that moment, saw myself as the force of nature, taking charge, like action and forward progress. And I'm fighting back against things. I'm not just letting life happen to me. And there was a time a couple of years later, as I continued to have that little quote by my desk, where I started to feel a lot of conviction and realized that I was also a sniveling clod of ailments. So, we want the world to conform to our playbook. We want other people to behave the way our playbook says they should, because that makes life easy for me as an individual. And it's natural that we would feel that way, but it's selfish, and it is not how God would want us to behave. And so I think what I have learned from listening to other people's stories is that I am no better than anybody else. My sin is not better smelling. My failings in God's eyes are not, a couple notches better, because we as humans really like to rank things. And what I have learned is, sin is just ugly in everyone. And while someone looking at my life might not be able to identify my sins as easily as looking at maybe somebody else's life, I know now what's in my heart. And more importantly, God knows what's there. And so I think the great gift that I have been allowed to receive from the work I do and the way the Spirit has used that in my life is to realize that I'm not really better than anybody else. I am subject to the whims of my playbook. I like it when I can trust on, I can rely in it and just sort of do what it tells me to do. And other people who have maybe lifestyles or choices that we would judge or condemn are also following their playbook. And the reason their playbook is different than mine is because they grew up in a different environment. So truly, when Scripture says, to whom much has been given, much will be required. If we grew up in a Christian home, or we have obtained a certain semblance of right and wrong that is roughly Judeo-Christian, we really can't take credit for that. That is a gift. That is a advantage that our playbook has that other people's do not have. And understanding that I cannot take credit for a lot of what I have become because my instinct comes out of my playbook, and my playbook has been shaped by the culture, the environment, the experiences that I have had, allows me to see other people with a lot more compassion and empathy, because I realize if I had been born differently, I may not be any better off than that person is, or I may not make different choices. Now, we do have the ability to make choices, but in order to do so, we have to realize that there is even a choice we can choose. And we have to be willing to do the work of confronting the playbook and wanting to change and wanting to conform it to Christ. And growing up in an environment where I see people making those choices and living out Christian faith around me in church community makes it easier for me to believe that that is both possible and also good. Not everyone has that advantage. And so I think how I see people is hopefully how God sees us. Broken, struggling individuals doing the best we can with what we've been given or what we've been dealt, and in a heart which says, I see your struggle and I see your suffering, and I want to reach you in that and enter into the mess of it and help you if you want me to. Because God allows us to choose to accept Him or reject Him. And so I can look on individuals with really messy things in their lives, and I really don't feel condemnation anymore. And I don't want people to hear me taking credit for that. That is the work of the Spirit in my life as I try to conform my playbook to Christ and act out His love for others. So I can look on them with not condemnation or really even pity, but with love. With love and a desire that says, okay, if you want, I can help you with this. And if they don't want, that is also okay, because God, the omniscient, omnipotent, perfect, perfectly good, perfectly loving God, lets us reject Him. So if someone doesn't want my help or they don't like my solution, I'm a human. Like, if God can say, I'm going to keep loving you in spite of that, then how can I not try also?
By understanding just a measure more of other people's playbooks, you are moved to compassion. And to me, that's real exciting. And this is exciting work, that this is how we can engender compassion for people.
God describes Himself as merciful and slow to anger And the reason he's merciful and slow to anger is he understands the baggage that we're struggling under. And he knows what's in our playbook and what's in our heart. And that allows him to be patient and merciful and gracious. And when we keep those same things in mind, I have found that it is easier for us to respond like God does, patiently, compassionately, mercifully, giving grace, allowing second chances and 20th chances and 770th chances, and helping people see that the bigger picture in the end is conformity with God, not some other social or personal or temporal agenda.
Keyna, I know a lot of this work has been put together in a Bible study. Say a little bit about that Bible study, and it is available through our bookstore and through the Apostolic Christian Bookstore.
Yeah. So I have been part of a team with Harvest Call, and there have actually been several teams of us that have worked on putting these thoughts into a Bible study, specifically around cross-cultural relationships. It was intended to be especially helpful for our missionaries or those who are going to be doing mission or evangelical work or discipleship work with those who come from maybe different ethnic or socioeconomic backgrounds. But as we've discussed, it's really applicable to all of us, our marriages, our work relationships, our family relationships. And that study has now been completed. It's published. It's available for purchase and download on the AC Bookstore. And it's titled All Nations.
Keyna, thanks for being on.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Really appreciate it. To our listeners, I think the content here today is very instructive at so many levels in our families, in our marriages, in our churches, in our neighborhoods, in our communities. As we have the privilege of conforming to Christ's playbook and developing his muscle memory and responding to people as he would so as to win them. So thanks each one for listening.